Hello, everybody. This is a part two of our series discussing cameras, models, with the respective issues and problems. Um, so in this video, we will be covering a Minolta SRT series. Now, I currently do not have one I can demonstrate in stock, so I've got the next best thing is the SR1S, which is very similar to the SRT in terms of the mechanics and operations. So, what can I say about the Minolta SRT? It's a highly mechanical camera, a very well-built unit, pretty reliable. I mean, it's probably, I would say, the oldest that I can think of Minolta camera that we work on. Actually, it's probably the oldest Minolta camera that there is, if my memory serves me right. Correct me if I'm wrong. But considering that fact and the age of the camera and the quality of the build and craftsmanship, but it's probably one of the better mechanical cameras out there. So in any case, with that said, there's still some issues that could come up every once in a while besides doing a standard overhaul and considering basic service. So one of the common issues that we do see on Minolta SRT cameras is a shutter lockup issue. So the shutter lockup basically can occur in multiple different ways. It could be just the fact that the winding lever is basically stuck, just like with this camera here. Okay, nothing you can do about it. The winding doesn't do much, the mirror doesn't move, the shutter obviously is not operational. So this would be a symptom number one, okay, of a locked up shutter. Another problem could be that when you wind the shutter, you release it and nothing happened. Okay, so that could be another symptom, but it all stems from the same problem. And that problem in most cases is not the actual shutter, but rather mechanical gear issues related to the winding mechanism. Okay, and that winding mechanism issues pretty much stem from the bottom portion in most cases. Every once in a while, there is a problem with a winding lever and mechanism that's concentrated on the top portion as well. But in my experience, majority of these winding issues are stemming from the bottom portion of the camera, where there's a battery compartment here typically, and right around this area where the problems occur and need to be tended to. There's many different things. Okay, so one of the issues is winding. Another possible problem that you may encounter is the slower shutter speeds just basically do not work. The camera releases, but the speed sounds about the same as if it was on the higher speeds. Okay, say 1/1000th of a second or 1/500th of the second. Okay, but when you move it to the a second or a half a second setting, it sounds about the same. It could occur, and it does occur. The reason behind it is actually a slow speeds governor. The slow speeds governor is located right next to the shutter speed dial under the top cover. And I might have one here, and just so I can demonstrate how this slow speed shutter governor looks. And it looks exactly like that. This is your guy here. Okay, it has a lot of gears, and it's responsible for slowing down the shutter operation, basically based on your shutter speed settings. So a couple of things could happen with this governor. One could be just a lack of lubrication. Now this is multiple gears working at the tandem basically at the same time. to set your shutter speed accordingly. So it's just a matter of lubricating sometimes, and the shutter gears will start working perfectly fine. Some other times you could also encounter that these gears, even though it's all metal, they will be chewed up and they will be worn out. In this case, we basically gonna have to replace this governor. There's really nothing I can do with worn out or chewed up gears except for just grabbing another one of these governors, which is kind of like what you have here. This is a working governor, a spare part that I have, just replacing it, and everything should work fine as far as the slower shutter speeds are concerned. Now this wouldn't obviously be related to the B, okay, bulb, because it doesn't engage the slow speeds governor. Okay, so that was basically problem number 2. Problem number 3, a lot of times you'll also notice that the self-timer lever, once engaged and activated or actuated, doesn't complete its process and gets stuck at about 45 degrees or so. Okay, now believe it or not, this has nothing to do, in my experience, with the self-timer, but rather has to do with the first issue that we've discussed earlier, and that's a winding mechanism. So when your winder and or quote-unquote shutter is stuck, okay, you try things to unstuck it or release it, and you will just, you know, activate your lever, actuate it, and because the mechanism itself is not allowing you to go any further and release it, because you cannot release it from here, and you won't be able to release it through the self-timer, it gets stuck quarter way before it needs to get itself in a position to release the camera, because the camera doesn't allow the release. Whether it's done manually or through the self-timer, to it makes no difference. So that's another thing. When you look at it and see that the self-timer is in a wind position and stopped just before its normal reset position, and chances are you have a winding issue or perhaps a shutter problem. All right, so the next possible issue that we can discuss, which is pretty common rather, and that's a light meter. Okay, so I've seen customers send us cameras and even discuss it online and even emails saying, listen, that meter hand is all the way at the top and there's no activity. Now there's many possible causes to it. When I say many, I probably over exaggerate. I would say about 3. It could be that the meter hand basically sticks to a piece of rotten seal and it needs to be unstuck. Okay, it could be that you have really no power to the battery. Imagine that there's actually a battery here, and I will actually see if I can find you a battery compartment to show and demonstrate. So let's see here. Actually a good example of what I was going to discuss. So this is a battery compartment from one of the bad cameras we replaced. You see the amount of corrosion and oxidation you have around here. Now this is the problem. This is exactly what I wanted to discuss. So this is a bad example of a battery compartment, and this is a good example. You see the difference. This part is corroded. This has a good solder joint on it. Okay, so when you have a battery that's left here, it releases the chemicals, it oxidizes, crystallizes, and basically prevents from power getting from the battery chamber to the circuit. And your meter, obviously, and that's the only thing that the battery does for this model, is controlling light meter and the battery check. So chances are that it could also be a problem. Okay, and as soon as you restore your power issue, replace the chamber or repair it or replace the wire that goes between the battery chamber and the circuit board, you will restore the light meter operation. Okay. Another possible culprit to the light meter issue is your light sensors or cells. Okay, now these cells, and I have an example of a prism. Now this is a prism with bed cells. Okay, this is the one that we replaced. So these cells are responsible for capturing light and reporting this to the circuit, to the light meter, and according to that, the light meter needle adjusts itself. Okay, so if these cells are depleted or bad, your battery check would work. Okay, however, your light will be or light meter rather will be pointing all the way to the bottom, and adjusting the light meter will not help. You will attempt to, or we will attempt to adjust it, but nothing happens because there's really no sensor to report the proper ambient light conditions. Okay, in this case, the only remedy that I have here is replacing this prism. Okay, and this prism comes with these two light sensors. And the only way for us to even replace it, and thankfully this is not a very common problem, but it does happen, is pretty much, scrapping it from another junker camera with a working prism and lights. If we don't have one of those junker cameras in stock, this camera will be unrepairable and returned back to the customer. So, excuse me. So that's another thing to look for. If you see a light meter just basically dropping to the bottom and your battery check still shows the proper voltage, chances are this is what we're dealing with here. And that's basically, I mean, it's not the end of the world as long as the camera works. A lot of times some of our customers have reported to me that they do not care much about the light meter because that can be done with a manual external light meter. Okay, they're using a camera exactly how they did before, but without the light meter. So I will actually service everything around this non-functioning light meter, clean it, do whatever needs to be done with the camera, but leave this alone if I don't have it in stock. All right, so other than that, the SRT camera, it's one of my favorite cameras, and I've seen these cameras in really good condition. People care for them, and I've seen them in terrible conditions where people just keep in mind this is metal. Okay, this is not plastic. Okay, so if you keep it in a humid area, attics, I don't know, saunas, wherever the cameras are kept, so it will corrode. The externals of it will look nasty after a while, and it's going to be very difficult to impossible to clean them. So please take care of these metal case cameras because they're metal. This is a galvanized plastic as well as this one and this is pure metal. So that's as far as Minolta SRT is concerned. Okay, so let's go ahead and put this away for now, or rather let's go ahead and swap it and discuss the next camera on our list, and that's the Minolta XD11. It's the same family as Minolta XD and Minolta XD7, XD5. Okay, for the exception of some of the some of the options are there, but again, we're not discussing options. We're just discussing scenarios, problems, and symptoms. Okay, I don't want to get into what one camera has versus the other. So what I have here with me is the most common XD series, and that's XD11. Now, this camera, in my experience, when it comes to repairs, is very, very temperamental. A lot of times, problems are, from the repair perspective, are very common, very typical, and sometimes they are anything but that. Okay, so let's discuss the most typical issues here. The good thing about this camera, it does not have problems with capacitors. I can tell you this right now. And I've heard and I've seen people commenting on Minolta XD11s replacing capacitors here and there. No need for that. You will only waste your time, possibly damage the camera, and waste money on purchasing unnecessary capacitors. This uses the old style ceramic blue style capacitor that does not leak. If you want to give it a chance and replace it, by all means. I don't think it's going to fix that problem though. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. So capacitor is not the problem. There is a capacitor here, no question about it, but that capacitor is always ceramic capacitor. All right, so let's start with the issues. Okay, a lot of times what you'll see is that regardless of the speed selection, when you release the camera, it feels like the shutter is being dragged. It's like it's in a slow motion, so to speak. Okay, it could be on the highest speed, or it could be on the slowest speed, could be on B. The effect is the same as you release the camera. It feels and it sounds that something prevents it from speeding up the shutter release. Okay, the reason being is because there is a cylinder spring pump mechanism on this side, and that basically consists of two parts, a cylinder and an enclosure with a spring. So what needs to happen to prevent that issue that spring cylinder needs to be removed, properly cleaned. There should be no oil in there whatsoever, but it needs to be properly cleaned. What happens over time, there's some debris, some oils from shutter or from anywhere else that accumulates in there, and it basically slows down that pump. Okay, so there's some resistance going up and down, and it basically advances the mirror, believe it or not. All it is doing is operating the mirror. It's nothing to do with the shutter. The shutter releases at its normal pace, but if your mirror doesn't flip up and down at the same pace with the shutter, you have overexposed or underexposed pictures. Okay, your sequence is not complete. So yeah, so that needs to be taken care of, and that's a pretty I would say common issue. About 70% of all XDs that we get have that issue, and those that do not, we will clean them regardless, because that's part of our standard overhaul for this specific model. Okay, so to the next problem. Let's see, you may see that when you look through the viewfinder, the light meter is erratic. So it's all over the place. It's jumping up and down, and as you operate this aperture ring, it either doesn't respond to your readings, or responds incorrectly, or does all kinds of weird stuff. And when you release, or even just look at the meter when pressing this button, the readings are way off. It's a very common occurrence as well, and this has to do with dirty contacts. Okay, so there's a couple of areas of these dirty contacts. Area number one is right behind this aperture ring. There is a sensor, okay, where this ring right now, when it's moving right to left or left to right, there's actually a series of contacts guiding on the sensor. That sensor gets dirty, and sometimes extremely dirty. Needs to be properly cleaned, and everything needs to be placed back correctly. Okay, so that would be culprit number one for this problem. Culprit number two is the top cover needs to be fully removed with all of these components. And then where this ASA dial sits on, there's another sensor and that's an ASA dial sensor that also gets dirtied, okay, oxidated, and made out of the same kind of component or quality material as this aperture sensor. So we need to basically do the same thing. So when we do overhauls on this particular model's XDs, we follow through with those steps as well. Because again, every camera is different. Even the same model carries different components and requiring different maintenance procedures. This is what XD series requires typically, okay? Because if you don't do it now, even if it works, chances are in the next month or a year, this problem may occur. So what we want to do is preventively just go ahead and take care of that so it does not come back to bite the customer, okay, in the future. So every time you see any kind of erratic behavior to the light meter, chances are those contacts are highly oxidated and need to be properly cleaned. All right, so the next possible issue is that the camera releases on the manual B and O, but it does nothing when it's set to any of the speeds here or auto or manual. It's actually a fairly common scenario, and in most cases what happens is that the release magnet in this camera, and it's built vastly different than any other Minolta camera, is dirty and it needs to be cleaned. Now it does not fail like it fails, let's say, on the Minolta X700 series. If you looked at that first part video, we've discussed that before. But in 99% of the time, cleaning that magnet resolves this issue, because basically release magnet, electronic release magnet, is bad or dirty. It needs to be the anchor, and the magnet itself needs to be cleaned. And as you know, this camera is electronic when it comes to speeds, except for B and O and X. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have batteries right now, but that's probably the case. All right, so look for that. And another possible scenario we have where the camera works electronically. It releases on all the speeds, but all the speeds are sounding the same. Okay, and that is actually a different problem. This problem could be twofold. It could either be a shutter magnet, or it could be a main circuit board. Now, a lot of times cleaning the shutter magnet, which basically requires us to remove the entire front panel to get to the shutter, fixes it. But in about 50% it doesn't. Okay, and it's not a shutter magnet, because I know that we've replaced even shutter mechanisms from good cameras and didn't solve the problem. And then I've done a little more investigation at the time, and the problem is one of the ICs here is basically bad. One of the ICs responsible for controlling the shutter speed is basically not working. It just or portion of that IC, and it releases all at the same speed. In this case, the camera will be basically, as far as we're concerned, not repairable, because we do not have replacement boards for it. The best we can do, we don't even have shutter bases for them, but what we can do is start with cleaning the magnet. If it fixes it, great, that was the problem. If it doesn't, then the problem is a little more complicated and requires a major part like a main circuit board. All right, so as you can see, this camera, as I mentioned before, I mean, it's a great camera. Not my favorite camera in the Minolta lineup, due to the fact that, again, if I'm the owner of the camera and if I'm seeing all these issues, it's a nice looking camera and all, but I'm not going to be too happy if this camera cannot be repaired. So, all right, it's a very temperamental camera, but if it works, it's a beautiful camera. If it doesn't, many things could be wrong with it. Some are repairable, some are not. Majority of them we do repair. I'd say about 75 to 80% success is what we have with these cameras. So there's a good chance we can fix the XD series unless it requires a main circuit board. Okay, so that will do it for this video. So far today we've covered the Minolta SRT and a Minolta XD series camera. Hope to see you in part 3, where we're gonna cover Minolta XE and Minolta XG series. Thank you for watching.